to co-create, to bring forth out of intelligence, out of thought, out of mind, the experience that we want to call forth into our life. Now, this is the place in which we get it mixed up and messed up and confused, because we have free choice. We don't have to do it in any particular way. We can do it in whatever way that we want. And knowing who we are as human beings, we like to try just about everything we can imagine, and we can imagine a lot of things. And so we begin to forget that our divine nature is about abundance, balance, beauty, love, joy, freedom, truth, wisdom, unity, wholeness. All of those qualities of God. And we kind of turn away from the light and we begin to look at contrast. Well, what would be in contrast to that? Well, there would be judgment, hate, lack, limitation, sadness, depression, all of those other things that we want to kind of go out there and play with, just so that we can have the experience, so that when we move through that, we understand that that's no longer the way that we want to live. Now, Ernest Holmes calls this the evolution of consciousness. That as a human race, we have been moving through this evolution, moving in a forward kind of way, and an upward spiral that says that our consciousness is growing and expanding and forever seeking to return back into that wholeness where we know the perfection of life. So when we ask the question, so where do we get this mental atmosphere? Where do we get this mental intuitiveness? Where do we get this intelligence and this idea of life? Because when science goes to look for it, and they start dissecting into the physical brain and into the body and all of the physical things that are there, and they're trying to find the smallest little particle, or they're looking out into the cosmos to find the greatest universal kind of thing that is there, they can never quite reach that point of infinite and eternal. For every time they begin to grow and expand, the universe grows and expands a little bit more. And this is what quantum theory is talking about, the observer effect, is that we begin to have the experience based on from where we are observing and with what we are observing. And so when we begin to look out into the world and we begin to observe from a place of lack and limitation, then what we are co-creating is more lack and limitation. Because that's where we're observing from. So we are somewhat responsible for everything that's going on in the world. Last week I spoke about this idea that Jack Canfield from Chicken Soup for the Soul, his mantra was that each individual, or his mantra for himself was that I need to be 100% responsible for my life. So everything that happens in my life, I'm responsible for, 100%. And that's a big task to take on. To think about that. But if we reflect upon it, and if we look at each situation in every condition, and we begin to find some place in there where we allowed for some situation, some condition, some appearance to slip into our experience, then we know that we have the power and the presence by which we can reverse that and bring it back out. That we can open our lives back up to the perfection and the wholeness of who we are. So to be responsible for that, to know that there is a power and the presence within us by which we can create and manifest and demonstrate our greatest wants and desires. Ernest Holmes asked us, so where do we get this from? So in the newest book that's out by Greg Braden called Deep Truth, and we also have these available now too, and he's a very scientific kind of person. And Greg comes out and he says, having looked at life and looked at ancient cultures and looked at society and looked at the science, the biggest question that shows up for humanity, and we've been around for something like 500,000 years, is where did we get all of this stuff? What are we doing here? What is our purpose? He has the same question that Ernest Holmes was asking in 1926. The same question that science is asking every time they look a little bit deeper, a little bit further, to find some answer, to find some explanation, to try to understand what does it sound like one hand clapping, or a tree that falls in the forest and there's nobody there. There must be a consciousness. There must be some intelligence that is in observing of all that is. For in order for anything to be, there must be an observer. Who is that first observer? Where does that first observer come from? And how do we get here out of that experience of the eternal life? Some pretty deep questions. So Greg Braden tries to break it down into 6 deep truths that he explains further into his book in order to do kind of a scientific approach. Now, those of you who have been around Science of Mind know that Dr. Ernest Holmes, the founder of Science of Mind, was very admiring of this thing called the scientific method. Because in the early 1900s, this is the way it was. This was the big deal. Everybody was using the scientific method. Not everybody understood it, but everybody was using it. See? Because they felt that they could find the answers. Every dogma, every theology, every culture, every country, trying to think of some other nomenclature there, everybody from all times and places had been trying to answer this question. Where do we come from? What are we doing here? And why are we even here? If we have this power to co-create life in the way that we want, couldn't we do it a little bit better? Couldn't we have a little bit more fun? Couldn't there be more joy and more gratitude and more prosperity in the world? Have you heard that before? Yes, it can be. That's what we're about. That's what we are doing. We are trying to grow and evolve our consciousness to a higher level of understanding so that we can bring more joy and more gratitude and more prosperity in our world. And every time I ask this, and everywhere I go, the people that I speak to, I have yet to find anybody who does not feel that they could have a little bit more of what they're having in a good sense. And that they would be okay with that. That it wouldn't interfere with their life. That a little bit more joy would be great. A little bit more happiness would be wonderful. A little bit more quiet time would be sublime. And we can do that, and we can bring that about. But we have to begin to look at what are the beliefs that are holding us back. What are the truths that we have held so strongly to out of the past that's keeping us in the past, that we need to release and let go in order for us to move into the present moment now, and to make the present moment now even greater so that when we step into our tomorrow, that it is something even greater.